Good evening to all of you. Apology for this late. So tomorrow we'll be starting right at 11 o'clock. So see, let me give you a brief outline of what all topics we'll be dealing in this roughly 10 classes. See, nothing of the paper 2 Indian administration will be dealing. Primarily we'll be focusing on the theoretical part. More particularly, we'll be dealing with those areas normally which is considered to be new in organizational theories. That means as far as the administrative thinkers are concerned, and at the same time the various other aspects of the administration, whether administrative behavior or other aspects relating to the administration, relating to the organization, mostly the theoretical part and those parts which are typically not in our syllabus but certainly related to some aspects of our syllabus. Maybe we can say those are more contemporary aspects of our syllabus. So we'll be dealing mostly those parts. We'll be dealing with the concepts like postmodernism. We'll be dealing with concepts like some post concepts, post bureaucratic theories, post institutional theories, post positivistic theories. We'll be dealing with in general as far as the normal theories that we usually read, like let's say the contingency theories basically relating to environment, or certain other theories basically relating to the technology or the process. So there are certain theories we deal with regard to these areas, but there are certain theories we generally do not deal. Even if we deal in a very limited fashion. So in all those areas of administration, basically the theoretical aspect of the administration, the newer aspects, the contemporary aspects, those things will be dealing in this roughly 10 classes. So that and the purpose of these classes will be twofold, especially those who are actually ongoing with your studies, so that while you are studying the syllabus, you study not only the very usual traditional part of your syllabus, but at the same time you are also equipped with the very dynamic and the contemporary aspect of your syllabus. That goes for others also, those who have already studied it. And this is the first aspect, that so that all of you are able to be aware with the very contemporary newer aspects, so that you have a very comprehensive understanding relating to the various topics, theories, or the principles that you are studying. The second important aspect is that there is a perception that we are having that possibly as far as the paper 1, that is the administrative theory is concerned, we are getting few questions which we possibly are not very comfortable. That means moment you see our question paper, we have a feeling, okay, there are few questions which maybe are troubling. So the second part of the second reason why we'll be taking up this is that whatever the type of questions that we'll be having, irrespective of the fact that in the very last year, that means the preceding year, the questions were pretty simple. Not much difficult questions were there. But irrespective of that, whatever the type of question that will be coming, we should be very comfortable. So these are the dual purpose for which these few classes will be adding. Now, the sequence that I will be having in terms of the areas that I will be covering would be, because since it will be relating to the contemporary aspect, so a very coherent approach will not be able to have. That very coherence will be missing, because this will be related to the theories that you have already studied, the theoretical things that you have already studied. We'll be going to add to that. We are going to enrich that. So we'll start with certain areas where you will find somewhat comfort. Okay, these things, a few of these things I know, and few additions are there. And gradually I will be entering into certain areas which you might find completely new. But again, those will not be difficult. As far as me is concerned, I believe that theories are most interesting, and if studied well, possibly they are the most easiest part of the syllabus as compared to the factual and other parts. So see, in public administration, as far as the theories are concerned, see, there are different theories relating to different aspects, but mostly we study organization. We study organization. We study functioning of the organization. Maybe we are more focused on studying a particular, unique, a special type of organization that we refer to as government organization, public organization, government organization. Now, as far as this organization is concerned, the functioning of this organization is influenced by number of factors that all of us in our usual study already have understood. It's influenced by number of different things. It's influenced by its laws, rules, regulations. It is influenced by its own structure. Structure is design. It's influenced by its managers, its leaders, the leadership, and all these things that influences. It influenced by the tools and techniques that it employs. So the functioning of the organization is influenced by number of these factors that we usually understand. Very normally we understand. We understand that it is influenced by, as I told, its leadership, its the managerial style, the structures, processes, the number of these, or the routines or the standards of doing things. So number of these things generally influence the functioning of the organization. If you tend to take into account this aspect, you will find that these are the intra-organizational factors. Intra means these are relating to within the organization. These are related to the within the organization, and in our theory, in our studies, the most of the focus has been on this intra-organizational aspect. That means predominantly the study has focused on this intra-organizational aspect, but again, of late, maybe towards the second part of the 20th century, and moreover toward the third quarter or the fourth quarter of the 20th century, the focus on the external aspect of the organization has increased. And in terms of the study, the focus on the external aspect of the organization, that has increased. Now, moment to talk about the external aspect of the organization. That external aspect of the organization, typically we term it with or we can refer it with a term. What is the term? What is that external aspect of the organization? We generally use a term to refer to that. What is that? Ecology or environment. What is that? Okay, generally we say ecology, we refer to it as environment. But again, let me give you a clarification here. A small clarification here. This basically refers to environment. Though many a time we use the term environment, we use the term ecology, we do use the term ecosystem very interchangeably. No, we use it interchangeably. But let me give you a very small clarification. For example, like let's say, you as a human being, see, outside you, there are certain realities. Realities in the form, there are other human beings are there. There is building, there is roads, there is, let's say, sun, there is temperature, there is rain. The number of these things are there. So there is a physical reality that exists outside you. And also there are other human beings. So this physical reality that exists outside you, that is what is generally referred to as environment. That's what is environment. But again, this physical reality that exists outside you, that not only exists in itself, it's not inert. There is an interaction that you go on interacting with this the outside reality. That very interaction that automatically will involve, let's say, the outside reality influencing you, and you to some extent influencing the outside reality. That very aspect is what is referred to as ecology. Are you able to understand the difference? But generally we use it very interchangeably. No, when we are using, we use it very interchangeably. We use ecology, we use environment, all these terms we use very liberally, interchangeably. But there is a finer difference. Now coming back to our discussion, I was referring that if you take into account the organizational theory, till now organizational theory has been very highly focused on the study of the intra-organizational aspect. It has been highly focused on the intra-organizational aspect, that means within the organization. But as I told, of late there has been higher focus, there has been more and more focus on understanding the external aspect of the organization, which we generally refer it as environment. Now today, let us try to understand those theories that has been focusing on analyzing the relationship between the environment and the organization. And in this, there are certain theories that all of you must have already studied. There will be few other theories that many of you may not have studied, or if you have studied, I would like to actually elaborate it more, because if you tend to take into account our questions, we find that the question from this section is certainly coming, and whether the name of this theorist or even the view of these theories, the very essence, the very theme that has been raised by these theories are being asked. Increasingly it is visible. So let me today deal with this particular aspect, the relationship between the environment and the organization. And in this particular context, let us try to deal with all those theories that has been dealing with this. All of you have studied systems theory. That's all of you have studied. I'm not going to deal with that. All of you have studied that aspect. Now, before I actually deal with those theories, identify those theories and elaborate upon those theories, let us as a layman try to take note of few things. Like let's say, this is an organization, and the organization is surrounded with something what we can refer to as environment. As per whatever you have studied till now, what is your understanding that organization determines environment, or the environment determines organization? Pardon? There has to be an equilibrium. Let me rephrase my question. Whatever you have understood till now, whatever theories that you have studied or things you have gone through, whether the environment determines the organizational success or failure, or organization can control its own success and failure, thereby it has definitive control over the environment. What do you understand? No, what is your understanding? Pardon? Both are possible. He is saying that both are possible. What does that mean? That means the environment defines the organizational success or failure, And second is saying the organization can control its own success and its own failure. That's what he's saying, both are possible. And can you put this argument, this very view into certain theories that you have studied? Strategic choice theory. He's saying strategic choice theory. In that he's saying environment controlling, sorry, organizations controlling, okay. And the environment controlling the organization? Contingency theory. He refers to something called contingency theory. Today, let us actually deal with these ideas. Let us try to understand that which of this idea is going to convince us. See, there are certain group of theories that we refer to as contingency theories. There is a group of theories that we refer to as contingency theory. There is another category of theories that we refer to as population ecology theory. Population ecology theory. And at the same time, there are also other category of theories that is referred to as resource dependence theory. Resource dependence theory. There is other category of theories with regard to this that's referred to as institutional theories. Institutional theory. Whether we are referring to strategic choice theory, strategic contingency theory, structural inertia theory. So a number of these theories are there. They will fall within some of these theories. Now, some of the theories that we might be referring, as he referred, let's say structural strategic choice theory. Or many of you might have actually referred to something called strategic contingency theory. Or there are also theories like, let's say, structural inertia theory. These are certain types of theories that they will fall within some of these bigger categories. So as far as the relationship between the environment and the organization is concerned, these are the four major categories of theories. Contingency theory, the population ecology theory, the resource dependence theory, and institutional theory. Now, before I go on to slightly detail these theories, especially this theory, the population ecology, resource dependence, and moreover institutional theory, because most of you have already gone through the contingency theory. So I will just briefly outline this. Now, before we do this, let me try to outline their basic focus as to the way they understand the relationship between the environment and the organization. See, if you take into account this first two theory, the dependence theory and the population ecology theory. If you take into account these two theory, they believe in environmental determinism. They believe in environmental determinism. If you take into account the resource dependence theory, this is a theory which believes in organizational agency. no, organizational agency. In fact, if you take into account the institutional theory, it basically it's not falling into these two different, this dichotomy of environmental determinism or organizational agency. In fact, it actually accommodates both this dimension. Both these aspects are there in the institutional theory. Now, when you say environmental determinism, that means environment determines. That means organizations, they do not have substantial, let's say, autonomy. The organization, the managers within the organization, the structures of the organization, or let's say strategies of the organization. Generally what we say, that okay, is the leadership, is the managerial skill, is the beauty of the strategy that the organization employs is going to determine whether the organization will be successful or a failure. That's what generally we say, that the managers are responsible for the success of the organization. The leaders are responsible for the success of the organization. That generally we tend to say. But see here, if you take into account these theories in fact are emphasizing that organizations are basically helpless. It's environment that determines. And in fact, if you take into account the population ecology theory, it's in terms of the environmental determinism, it is much more. It's more rigid. It's simply, in fact, there is a theorist, Herbert Kaufman. Now we'll discuss those things. He would say that the success of organization is nothing but a matter of luck. Highlighting what? Lack of agency within the organization. Lack of agency within the organization. Moment you say agency means autonomy. Acting as an agent with autonomy to actually decide, choose, or attain success. So if we take into account these two theories, they in fact believe in environmental determinism, and specifically if you take into account population ecology theory, this is the theory which is more deterministic. In fact, to an extent that if you take into account a theorist in it, we'll discuss that subsequent, in the today itself, that it emphasizes that the success of an organization is basically a matter of luck, chance, luck. On the other hand, if you take into account the resource dependence theory believes in the proactive nature of the organization, and moreover the capability of the organization to control its fate. So that means an organization, a government, an administration, an agency, or an office, or an organization, this particular theory believes that it has capability to control its own fate. So that means substantially it is actually negating to some extent these theories. And as I told, if you take into account this theory has some distinct contributions. Now, with this, let us try to understand one by one. Overall idea all of you got? The overall assumption of these theories all of you are able to get? Okay. See, I will urge all of you that more than the individual facts and let's say principles, you should be more clear about the very theme that each of these theories are arguing. That will make our job much easier, because see, not necessarily every theorist you will be able to read, but will be able to, with a good effort, will be able to cover almost every aspect relating to let's say the organizational analysis. So moment you are able to deal with almost every aspect, with regard to the organizational analysis, see whatever question will come, that will be either from one theme or the other. So that will address our purpose. Okay? Now, let me deal with this one by one. See the contingency theory. Contingency theory, most of you might have gone through. So this, let me start with. See, as the name says, contingency. See, it is a group of theories that rejects the idea of one best way. That means it rejects the very view that a single structure is the best, or single process is best, or a single practice is the best. Instead, it emphasizes that appropriateness of a particular structure or organizational practice depends or is contingent upon certain factors in the environment. So what is the basic essence of this particular theory? This theory says there is no one best structure or one best practice. So there is no single practice, there is no single structure that is considered to be the best. Rather, the appropriateness of a particular structure or a practice depends on the environment. It depends on, it's contingent on certain factors in the environment. Two most important studies that's very popular with regard to the contingency theory. Those being the study of Lawrence and Losh. And the other important study with regard to this is Burns and Struck. Stacker. So these are the two most important studies with regard to the contingency theory. See, what is the theory of Lawrence and Loss? See, Lawrence and Loss conducted their study while considering 10 firms, not 10 organizations, but primarily they considered 3 type of organizations. 10 different forms they studied, but again they fall into these 10 different forms fell into 3 major categories. Those being the plastic companies, the food processing companies, and container. Plastic industries, food processing industries, and container industries. And in that, they found out that these organizations, they are operating in 2 different type of environment. Those 2 different type of environment was the certain environment and uncertain environment. What is certain environment? All of you must have already gone through. What is the certain environment? Certain environment basically refers to a comparatively calm environment. That means in the environment outside of that organization, there is relatively less competition or no competition. customer choices are stable, technological innovations are marginal or near absent. These are certain things that generally define what we refer to as a certain environment. On the other hand, when we refer to uncertain environment basically would refer to a very highly, turbulent environment, highly competitive environment, customer choices are very dynamic, technology is fast changing, there is innovation. That's what is uncertain environment. And say the study in fact found out, the Lawrence and Lords found out that the plastic industries, they are operating in an uncertain environment. The container industries are operating in a very certain environment. And if you take into account the food processing industries, they are operating in an environment which is somewhat intermediate. That means it is less uncertain that of the environment of the plastic industries, and it is more certain, less certain than that of the container industries, having an environment that is somewhat intermediate. So the environment of the food processing industry is somewhat intermediate. Now the finding they have is that the successful plastic industries, the successful plastic industries who are operating in which environment? Unstable environment, that is uncertain environment. The successful plastic industries are having more flexible structure. And if you take into account the container industries, they are having more rigid structure. So successful container industries are having rigid structure, and successful plastic industries are having more flexible structure. See, not only their theory came out with a mere description that this is what has been found, rather they provided a theoretical rationale. That means theoretically they tried to explain why it is so. What was the theoretical rationale? They explained that in a stable environment or a certain environment, an organization which is having rigid structure means everything is established, routinized. A rigid structure, that means established structure, defined hierarchy, defined division of labor, defined rules, regulation, all this. So in a certain environment, a rigid structure is successful because everything is defined. You can define everything, you can standardize everything, and you can deal with that successfully. On the other hand, in an environment that is uncertain, a flexible structure made plastic industry successful. Why? Because see, when environment is unstable, uncertain, it changes faster. So the moment it changes faster, it will require the adaptive capacity. So one need to adapt to those changes. So the need for adaptation can be possible only when the structure is flexible. So that very character made plastic industries, those are flexible, more successful. This theory is, this particular theory already, most of you must have gone through. So that means, see, what does this theory actually establish? This theory established, see, as far as the environment is concerned, is a critical factor, and you cannot say there is one structure that will be always successful, one practice that will be always successful. Rather, environment is going to play a critical role. The character of the environment is going to determine your success or your failure. The organizational success or failure is going to be determined by the environment. If the organization is having a flexible structure, then it is going to be successful depending on the nature of the environment. If the environment is uncertain and you have a flexible structure, then only you will be successful. And if the environment is actually certain and you have flexible structure, you will be unsuccessful, you will be a failure. So this theory for the first time established the critical influence of the environment. But see, in this theory, one more aspect one need to understand. That is, this theory not only highlighted that the organization's success or failure depends on its structure being congruent with overall character of the environment. Rather, this theory also emphasized or established that how the organizations have sub-environments. So not only organization have its own environment, but at the same time, the organizations within them have sub-units and their sub-environment. So another important contribution of this theory, that not only there is an overall environment of the organization, but organization has subunits, and the subunits have its own sub-environment. What are the subunits? Lawrence and Lodge highlighted 3 subunits. One is research and development, sales, and manufacturing. Research and development, sales, and manufacturing. Now, if you take into account this research and development, sales, and manufacturing, do you think all these 3 different units of a particular organization would have the same type of environment to encounter? No. Because if you tend to take into account the research and development will be having a more dynamic environment or a more stable environment? A much more dynamic environment. Because it has to deal with creativity, innovation. So it has to face with a number of challenges. So the environment of the research and development will be substantially different from the environment of manufacturing. If you tend to take into account manufacturing, you can understand which type of environment it will be having. Stable. Why? Why it will be having a certain environment, stable environment? Because research and development already will decide what to produce, what not to produce. So manufacturing is not going to decide. The necessary turbulence, the required dynamism that has to be exercised at this level, research and development. And at the same time, once things are produced, manufacturing is not going to deal with how to sell it, how to deal with a turbulent market. So for manufacturing, the environment is certain. Why? With the turbulence or uncertainty is actually observed by research and development and the sales. So in that particular context, the study also indicated, in this study, it was also found out that the type of structure, internal structure of the research and development of the same organization has to be different from the internal structure of the manufacturing of the same organization. So within the same organization, different units will be having the different structure. So simply here, this study highlighted 2 aspects. One, the outside environment is going to determine the organizational structure for it to be success or failure. Second, this is not the only idea that needs to be taken into account. The second aspect is the organization itself has internal aspect, its subunits, and these subunits have their own environment, and these subunits and their structure is going to be determined by the respective environment. So the same organization is also going to have different structures within it, though its overall environment might be something same. So overall environment might have a quality or a character, but the sub-environment is also equally important to be considered. That is going to determine the success or failure of the organization. See, notwithstanding the specific discussion on the environment, organization, subunit, sub-environment, this theory highlights that an organizational success or failure depends on its environment. whether it's the overall environment or the sub-environment. A similar type of study has also been conducted by what we have referred to the other theorist, Burns and Stacker. Now the Burns and Stacker. See, Burns and Stacker, they studied 4 firms, and they similarly tried to understand the impact of environment on the organizational structure. While the Lawrence and Laws studied certain environment and uncertain environment, the same idea was taken up by Burns and Stacker, and they in fact dealt it from the idea stable and unstable environment. The same. The whatever has been referred by Lawrence and Laws as certain and uncertain, Burns and Stacker referred the same as stable and unstable. Now simply let me elaborate this aspect. See, their study found out that in stable environment, mechanistic structure has been successful. And from the term you can actually make out mechanistic structure. This structure will be which type of structure? Something traditional Weberian structure? Now, is it hierarchy? Is it specialization? Strict rules and regulations? No, that will be mechanistic structure. On the other hand, they found out, their study found out that in an unstable environment, an organic structure has been successful, and you can actually identify the term. If you refer to organic structure, what exactly would be this organic structure? Organic, organism. That means a type of structure that has the ability to adapt. It's not rigid, that means flexible. It has the necessary capacity to adapt. And the study in fact actually is reinforcing of the, but both these studies have a similar type of viewpoint. That if the environment is certain or stable, a mechanistic structure, a rigid structure is more successful. If the environment is something unstable, uncertain, then a flexible or what Burns and Stacker referred to as organic structure is more successful. Now these studies in fact comprise of what we generally refer to as contingency theory. Now, they generally comprise of what we refer to as contingency theory. That means if you try to take into account the essence of these theories are based on the idea what we otherwise refer to as requisite variety. Requisite variety. What does that mean? This means, see, an organizational system depends on its capacity, or the success of an organizational system depends on to the extent its structure is according to the complexity or the diversity that exists in the environment. So if you take into account the environment is diverse, environment is complex. So an organization that is operating in that environment is dealing with certain aspect of that environment. And in that particular context, if that organization is able to correspond with that part of the environment to which it is dealing with, then that organization becomes successful. Let me repeat this thing. See, if you take into account an environment has many components within it. So environment is complex. Environment is actually having number of different elements, aspects. But say an organization that is operating, it deals with certain aspects of the environment. It has the organizational functioning, organizational cooperation is meaningful towards certain aspects of the environment. If the organization or the organizational system is able to correspond the relevant aspect of the environment, or correspond to the relevant aspect of the environment, then the organization becomes successful. That's what is requisite. Variety. So here variety refers to what? In the environment the environment is diverse. Environment has diverse component. Environment carries number of different components, aspects. An organization that is operating, say, deals with certain aspects of that environment. If it is able to successfully correspond with that, then the organization becomes successful. Otherwise, the organization will be a failure. So this particular theory simply says environment determines the success of the organization, and those organizations are successful which are able to correspond to the required, let's say, character of the environment. So those organizations which are able to, those are in congruence with the required character of the environment, they become successful. Other organizations become unsuccessful. This is the very essence of contingency theory. But let's go beyond it, because in our syllabus we have till this contingency theory. But we are, the statements or questions that we are getting is beyond this. We are getting more than this. Let us try to understand the other major theories relating to environment and the organization. Now let's try to detail those theories. See, now let's take into account the population ecology theory. The most prominent proponent of this theory would be Hanna and Freeman. And they are the most prominent theorist. And that is also another influential theorist with regard to this particular theory, that is Herbert Kaufman. See, it is a slightly different type of theoretical analysis. In contingency theory, the focus is that a single organization, to the extent it is in accordance with the character of the environment. To the extent an organization is congruent with the organizational character, environmental character is successful. That's what is the emphasis under the contingency theory. But see, under the population ecology theory, here the focus is on organizational population in a given environment or ecology. So when you refer to organizational population basically means the number of organizations operating in a given domain or in a given industry. So basically, if you take into account, let's say, school education, the number of organizations operating in that will comprise what? The organizational population. And basically, here the population ecology theory is not simply focusing on to what extent this organization is congruent with this environment or satisfying the demands of the, in that particular context, to what extent is actually in accordance with the environment. Rather, see, if you take into account the population ecology theory, it's focusing on group of organizations. It's focusing on the organizational population. That population is basically the group of organizations operating in a particular industry or in a particular functional area. That's what is the organizational population. Now, what exactly the population ecology theory focusing? The population ecology theory is emphasizing that, say, organizations, in order to operate, they require resources. Those who are able to secure resources, they survive. Those who are not able to secure these resources, they die. So a simple outline they are actually coming out with. What is that? That, say, those who are able to secure resources, they survive, and those who are not able to secure resources, they die. So number of different resources are required for an organization. So an organization which is able to secure those resources are successful, they survive, they continue, and the organization which are not able to secure those resources, they die. But again, see, this theory makes a very interesting observation. It says the organizations, in order to secure resources, they tend to choose certain tools, techniques, practices. That means they set up certain standards, routines, or procedures. So an organization, in order to operate in a particular area or in a particular functional area, it tends to establish certain procedures, strategies, routines or standards. And those established standards and routines help that organization to survive or to exist. For example, let me give an example before we proceed. Let's say you're setting up a school or you're setting up a hospital. So that hospital, in order to survive, what is required? It has to, in order to achieve its goal, in order to operate with success, it has to undertake certain functions, it has to undertake certain activities. So in that particular context, it establishes certain strategies, it follows certain procedure, it brings about certain types of routines. So in a hospital, there is the manner in which the patients are to be admitted, the manner in which the doctors are actually to be consulted, the manners in which, let's say, the treatment is to be conducted, the No, the public relation is to be conducted. So number of these aspects are there. And for that organization establishes certain rules, certain regulations, certain practices, certain procedures. This happens with every organization. So organizations, in order to sustain, in order to survive, in order to operate, they set up standards, they come up with procedures. But at the same time, say, the environment in which they operate not necessarily remains static. The environment goes on what? Changing. Environment is never static. Environment goes on changing. So the changing environment will require those routines to continue or the routines to be changed. Standards to be changed. Practices to be changed. Structures to be changed. So what the theory is saying, see, organizations, in order to operate, they need to follow certain standards. They have to establish routines. They have to establish certain procedures. But at the same time, the environment is not static. The environment will change. And when environment changes, there's a demand on the organization. What the demand on the organization? They have to also change. They have to accordingly change. Their practices has to change. The standards has to change. The structures has to be changed. But see, the population ecology theory, especially if you take into account the Hanna and Freeman, it is emphasizing especially while referring to a theory that he refers to as structural inertia theory. Hanna and Freeman emphasizing that there is a structural inertia which is being referred to as structural inertia theory. Let me elaborate what is this structural inertia and what is that is explained under this structural inertia theory. The structural inertia theory highlights this basic contradiction, this fundamental contradiction. What is this fundamental contradiction? One, in order to remain successful, in order to actually address successfully the requirement and to survive, what is required? Standards are to be established, procedures are to be established, routines are to be followed. But at the same time, the changes are inevitable, and moment the changes are inevitable, the structures needs to be changed, practices needs to be changed. But as the structural inertia theory says, it is not easy to change structures. Not only it is difficult to bring about changes in the structure, in fact, the effort to change structures are also dangerous. Note this aspect. Now note this particular aspect. This is a very interesting point this particular theory is making. The theorists are saying that the adaptation is required, but the structural adaptation is difficult. And not only structural adaptation is difficult, but this effort, this very urge to bring about structural adaptation has its dangerous consequences. Let us try to further explain this particular idea with the help of another population ecology theorist, that is Herbert Kaufman. The same idea, let's try to expand it further, understand it better with the help of another theorist, another important theorist of the population ecology theory, that is Herbert Kaufman. Now see, Kaufman has further elaborated this particular aspect. He's saying that, see, the structural adaptation is difficult. Why it is difficult? It is difficult because organizations are human organizations. They're not machines, they're not robots, they're human organizations. And since they're human organizations, human beings are going to differ in their views, their opinion, their understanding, their beliefs and values, interest. So that means relating to the change, there is going to be difference of opinion and it's very difficult to establish consensus. So people are going to have different opinions. Somebody might say, okay, that's not much of change. Somebody will say, okay, there are changes. But those who are actually say, okay, there are changes, they might differ in their view of the nature of the change, the type of the change. We see only when you accept there is a change and only when you understand what is the change, you can bring about the required change, structural adjustment. But Kaufman is saying, see, if you take into account organizations, organizations are human organizations. So what is required? This theorist are saying, see, moment you have set up an hospital, in order that hospital to survive, you have to establish certain standard practices. Unless until you have standard practices, it's very difficult. You have to go for establishing standard practices. But at the same time, things are not going to be static. The standard practices that you're going to establish, that might be good for that particular time, but as the situation will change, you have to bring about what? The necessary changes in the structure of the hospital, the other practices of the hospital. Unless you do that, that's a danger. But these theorists are saying, see, first of all, changing that is very difficult. Not only changing that is difficult, but change itself has also its dangerous consequences. And we are trying to further explain this aspect with the help of another theorist, Kaufman. What Kaufman is saying? Kaufman is saying, see, if you take into account this hospital and the people who are involved in, let's say, decision making, they are human beings. There's a plurality of humans. And these humans have their different values, interest, let's say, ideas. So thereby, they are going to differ in their opinion. So that's as far as decisions are concerned, that the decisions that what to change, how to change, whether there is change or no change, so that is going to be different opinion. That means coming to a decision is going to be difficult. Coming to an agreement is going to be difficult. Not only this is the only difficulty. Agreement is not only the only difficulty. The second important difficulty is there is going to be a slippage. Problem of slippage. What is that problem of slippage? The problem of slippage is the decisions that will be taken and the actual implementation is going to differ. So many times we take some decision, we plan something कि ऐसे ऐसे करेंगे ना, आज पॉलिटी पढ़ेंगे, हिस्ट्री पढ़ेंगे, इतना ना 5 दिन में खत्म करेंगे, in 5 days I have to complete this. Then no, we go for lots of planning. First of all, if you are doing that in a group, let's say, just imagine, like your seniors preparing for this exam 10 years back, a decade back, or 5 years back. So for preparing this for this examination, you need to actually develop certain pattern, certain structure. Okay, the civil service exam different from let's say NDA or for that matter banking and all this thing. So for that you need to actually develop a type of approach for this exam. And let's say let's say 5 of you came together and started preparing for this. You have developed a strategy. This way we'll be preparing. But again, things doesn't remain the same. Things go on changing. Let's say you have to, those people who have prepared 5 years back, they have to advise you. Maybe you'll feel, those advices will not be that relevant. Why things are changed. But let's say the same people who have been preparing, let's say 2 years back or 3 years back or 4 years back, they continue to prepare somehow, and again there are changes. Moment there are changes, you need to change your approach. Moment you have to change your approach, this theory starts saying changing approach is not easy. It's very difficult. Why difficult? Because 5 of you are actually, let's say individually or 5 of you, first of all, you have to recognize there is a change and recognize the nature of the change. All 5 of you are going to differ. What is the change? How the change? Where the change? Not only all of you are going to differ, but moment let's say you took a decision कि ऐसे करना है. This is how we have to prepare. This is how we have to go about it. In actual implementation, there is going to be a difference. The way you have actually planned and the way we are going to implement. That is why the Kaufman, supporting the argument of Hanna and Freeman, highlighting that the structural adaptation is not only very difficult, it's near impossible. That means in the way, that means to attain perfection in terms of adapting the structure as per the requirement of the environment is not only difficult, it's impossible. That perfection will never be there. We'll never be able to achieve that. And in that particular context, what they are actually saying, that means adaptation is not actually the case. The organizations are not able to adapt as per the requirement of the environment. This is something not possible. So in that particular context, what happens? Some organizations survive and some organizations do not survive. They say it is a matter of luck. So the population ecology theory, they emphasize that ultimately the success and failure of the organization that depends on the environment, and in this particular context, the organization ability to adjust to the environment is not only difficult, it's near impossible. That means the role of the manager of a focal organization, that means role of the manager of a concerned organization to appropriately adapt to the requirement of the environment is simply negated by this theory. They simply say which organizations succeed? Organizations succeed, those are able to acquire resources from the environment. But in order to acquire the resources from the environment, you need to have, let's say, established routine, practices. But those established routines and practices do change. When it change, you cannot adapt perfectly. That means your ability to acquire resources and your ability to adapt is more accidental rather than completely as per your plan. That means it's not completely under your control. It's not completely under your control. Rather, your adaptation and your suitability towards the environment is something accidental. This is what, that is why they are saying that if you take into account this organizational success is more that of luck rather than the actual exercise of managerialism or leadership. So they are negating what? Autonomy of the organizations. They are negating the autonomy of the organization. The organization has autonomy, organization can control, organization can define its fate. Something like, let's say, we say, हम लोग बोलते हैं कि नहीं, हमारे क्या बोलते हैं, we control our fate. Few of you will say, no, we don't control our fate. Fate controls us. Something like that. These theorists are saying that organizations, for that matter managers, they are not in control of organization's fate. Who controls the fate? Environment controls the fate. So that in that environment, there is a group of organization, and these group of organization, among this group of organization, there will be few who will be successful, there will be few who will be, or others who will be failing. And who all will be successful? Those who will be able to acquire the resources nicely. But who will be able to acquire, in order to acquire the resource, what is required? You need to have certain practices. But those practices are not going to remain the same. Why? Because the environment is going to change. So today you might be actually surviving, tomorrow you may not survive. Whether you will survive tomorrow or not, that depends on environmental selection, not depending on your capability. Are you able to understand? You might agree with this theory, you may not agree with this theory. Are you able to understand the very essence, the very the foundational argument of this theory? What this theory is saying? That the survival, today this organization might be surviving, tomorrow it might survive, may not survive. The survival of this organization depends on environmental selection. It does not depend on the organizational agency. It doesn't depend on the manager's capability or manager's ability to bring about the necessary change. Because the change itself is difficult and change itself has dangerous consequences. Clear about this idea? Population ecology. This is a basic argument of the population ecology theory. Destroy, huh? His question is, now his questions he has divided into 3 parts. Let me paraphrase this. One, he is saying Weber told that bureaucracy once established difficult to destroy. Second, here this theory is saying organization might survive, may not survive. And the third thing is attaching with this is that today also bureaucracy thrives. So how can this theory say that organization might survive, may not survive? 3 statements that he made, those are factually correct statements, but incoherently connected. Because first of all, when Weber said bureaucracy once established hardest to destroy, that is an individual theorist's opinion about a particular rationalized structure. Because he was discussing that from a particular standpoint. He is saying that in his study he found out there are 3 types of administrative system: patrimonial, feudal and bureaucracy. He referred that bureaucracy has also its negative aspects, but it has also positive aspect. The positive aspect is much more as compared to negative aspect. So he referred, as compared to these 3 different systems, bureaucracy is the most efficient. So thereby bureaucracy cannot be replaced by any other system. If you want to replace it, you have to replace it with a more efficient system. But the existing system, that is feudal and patrimonial, are less efficient. So even if you are not happy with the bureaucracy, you cannot replace it because there is no substitute. Second, its advantages far outsmart the disadvantage. So that is why people are going to be so much acquainted with this type of administration that they themselves are going to protect this. And bureaucracy being a power instrument, it will also have its own way of protecting itself. That is the Weber's argument. And Weber was arguing relating to a form of organization. It was not arguing a particular A organization or B organization. So there might be, in a particular environment, there might be 100 organization, and all these 100 organization might be bureaucracy. And out of this 100 organization, today, these 100 organizations are there. Tomorrow, out of this 100, 40 might exist, 60 might vanish. That does not mean that all of them, if at all they are bureaucratic organization, that doesn't mean bureaucracy destroyed. Those organizations destroyed. This theory is not saying a particular form of administration will be destroyed. This theory is saying in a particular industry or a setup, there will be a group of organization. In that group of organization, who will succeed and who will not succeed, that's a matter of environmental selection. So this discussion is not related to a form of organizational structure. Okay, that's not related to a form of organizational structure. And the third aspect that you are saying, that bureaucracy even today continues. That also will take up somewhat later. Because there is something called these 2 major viewpoints. One, the death of bureaucracy. with certain changes. There is actually now there are theories to including Warren Bennis, Alvin Toffler, number of these theories they are actually saying that the death of bureaucracy. But there are other theorists are there. They say that no, that is not death of bureaucracy. Rather, bureaucracy continues, maybe with suitable changes. In fact, there is more of bureaucracy. So we'll discuss that. Anyway, so this is what is the population ecology theory. Now, whether contingency theory or population ecology theory, they're emphasizing on environmental determinism. Environmental is actually the powerful one, and that determines the organization, its structure, its functioning, everything. So, if you take into account these two theorists, it makes the organization a powerless entity. It makes the organization lacking in autonomy. That means the contingency theory and population ecology theory de-emphasizes the organizational agency. It de-emphasizes organizational agency. But see, this viewpoint has been objected by a theory called resource dependence theory. So this is a theory which emphasizes on the importance of organizational agency. I'm using repeatedly this term, organizational agency. What does that mean? Organizational agency means, like let's say, I as a human being, if I do not have any autonomy, if I do not actually independently act, many a time we say, we act according to, let's say, what I am directed to. Like let's say if you take into account, let me try to make you understand this particular term by using some standard theories that we have studied. If you take into account classical theories, the Weber's theory or Taylorian theory, if you take into account classical theory, within the classical theory, as far as the role of employees are concerned, they are given freedom or they are not given freedom? They are not given freedom. They are expected to act according to what? The laws, rules, regulation that's actually established, the standards and routines that is actually set up. So what they have to do, what they have to achieve, how they have to do, what processes to follow, what techniques to use, what steps to actually undertake, all these are defined. So that means within the organization, as defined by the classical theory, the human loses its agency. Now possibly you will be able to understand, loses its agency, that means loses its autonomy. But moment you say, no, I am a human being, and I being a human being, I am something different from a machine. So since I am different from a machine, so how I am different? Because I have my emotion, I have my beliefs, I have my values, my needs and expectations, and many a time I cannot be controlled. I simply cannot be controlled by the laws, rules, regulation, or let's say the definitions of the organization. So the human being can never be controlled by the, let's say, the definitions of the organization. Rather, they act according to many of their social, psychological eccentricities. So then we are highlighting on what? Human agency. We're highlighting on the human agency. So here we are talking about organizational agency. To what extent organization have that autonomy? To what extent managers within that organization have that autonomy to control the fate of the organization? So if we take into account the contingency and the population ecology theory, especially population ecology theory, it simply says organization do not have that very agency, autonomy. Because in order to have the autonomy, you need to actually decide the change, and not only decide the change, you should be able to actually bring about that change. First of all, deciding the change becomes difficult. Second, even if you decide, implementation, that's not possible, because what you decide and what you implement, there is a discrepancy. So ultimately what happens? Accidental, chance. So in that environment, is the environment in that particular population, among that population is the environment that selects. So it's a chance factor, few survive, few do not. But this theory, the resource dependence theory, rejects this view. The resource dependence theory says that no, organizations retain autonomy. That is the organizational agency. Let's try to understand this particular theory. See some of the proponents of this theory. You can actually note the names. Pfeffer and Salancic, Minch and Swatch. Or Michael Wasim. These are some of the major proponents of this theory. Pardon? This one. This Pfeffer and Salancic. Salancic. Okay. Minch and Swatch. Michael Wasim. Let me elaborate this theory. See, this theory is saying, if you take into account organizations today are producing specialized products. That means not only within the organization there is division of labor, among the organization there is also division of labor. So somebody is producing education, somebody is producing health, somebody is actually going for mining, and some other organization is actually taking up, processing those raw material, mineral resources. So here, if you take into account the health sector itself, so one particular organization is dealing with, let's say, the production of the medicine, and other is actually dealing with treatment. So if you take into account the organizations, not only within the organization, but also among the organization, there is division of labor. So in that particular context, the organizations are interdependent. They depend on each other. And if you take into account the organization, they not only depend on other organization, they depend on number of other factors. Those could be considered as resources. So the organization depends on the customer so that the customer purchases their product, or the citizen likes their administration. The organization depends on suppliers, because for producing something you need certain supplies. So delivering certain services you need certain supplies. So you depend on suppliers. You are also dependent on the role of your competitors, how they are actually doing, what they are doing, the manner they are doing. And at the same time, the organizations are also dependent on regulators. Regulators here would be, let's say, trade union, government, other agencies. So government can come out with a law, government can come out with a policy, and that policy has significant repercussion. So government changing a policy relating to, let's say, pharmaceutical or health, it might have a definite impact on what? Many organizations operating in that particular sector. So these theorists are saying that, see, if you take into account organizations, the organizations are dependent on, let's say, number of other factors. The organization dependent on other organizations are dependent on customer, competitor, suppliers, regulators. So that means organizations, they depend on these factors which they are referring to as resources. And these resources are there in the environment. Organizations and their interaction with this resource is going to determine their success or failure. So organization needs these resources. Organization needs, let's say, money. Organization needs, let's say, the capital, or let's say customer, or let's say raw material. Organization needs to sell their product through retail chains. So organization needs these resources, and the resources are there in the environment. And since resources are there in the environment, environment exercises control over the organization. But see, in the initial argument, we'll find this is something very similar to the population ecology theory itself. But again, it's highly different from that. It's very different from that. Because see, if you take into account this particular theory, this theory is not explaining, is not trying to explain that to the extent a particular organization is able to successfully acquire the resource, will be successful. No. This theory is saying that, see, since organizations depend on these resources, and resources that are in the environment, then these organizations become vulnerable to these resources, vulnerable to this environment. To the extent the organizations will be able to neutralize this vulnerability, the organizations will succeed. Let me repeat this. Let me explain this again. Before I elaborate this theory, before we tend to repeat those theoretical lines, let me take up an example, and through that example let me try to elaborate. One example that the author has taken up, let me explain that. Explain through that. All of you must be aware of the Bethlehem steel plant. In which theory you have studied this? Taylor? No, you have studied that in Taylor. When you studied Taylor, you studied Bethlehem steel plant. Taylor worked in that. But anyway, it's a organization that still continues. See, Bethlehem steel plant as a steel manufacturing plant, it depends on certain things. For its survival, it depends on the environment or certain resources. What are the resources? Because it's going to produce that. So, certain raw material. It requires certain raw material. And at the same time, it has to sell it. So that means a particular organization which is going to consume that. So maybe if you take into account a particular consumer, a automobile maker is going to consume a lot of steels, the major buyers. So if this organization is dependent on these factors in the environment. So in that, if let's say the supplier says I will not supply you or increases the price, is a difficulty to the organization or not? If the, let's say, the one who is procuring, one who is purchasing simply says, no more I am going to purchase it from you, I will purchase it from somebody else. The organization comes under threat or not? So what this particular theory is saying? This theory is saying that if you take into account organizations, whether private or government, they are dependent on certain resources, and these resources are there in the environment. So whether you are dependent on citizen satisfaction or customer satisfaction, whether you are dependent on a supplier or let's say a retail chain, all these are there in the environment. So to the extent these resources are certain to you, that means you're able to have a certain relation with this, you are successful. But these resources in the environment, they're very uncertain. So moment they're uncertain, what they will make? They will make the organization vulnerable. So that is what the other theorists are saying. Population ecology theory. Population ecology theory is also saying, you see, the environment is uncertain. Moment it's uncertain, organization becomes vulnerable. But in order to be actually successful, you need to change. But change is actually difficult. That perfect change is impossible. So thereby, lot remains on fate, lot remains on chance. But this theory is discussing from a different perspective. This theory is saying, you see, the ability of a particular organization to neutralize vulnerability to this resource uncertainty or the environmental uncertainty is the key to the success or failure of the organization. So if the organization is able to neutralize, minimize this uncertainty, then the organization will be successful. If the organization will not be able to minimize or neutralize this uncertainty, organization will be unsuccessful. Now how the organization will be able to neutralize or minimize this uncertainty? It will be able to minimize or neutralize the uncertainty through certain techniques or strategies. Those strategies could be buffering strategies, buffering strategies. Buffering means, like let's say, something like let's say, you are dependent, let's say a particular organization, McDonald. Let's lots of bread or not. So if the bread supplier, bread supplies suffer, or the price of the bread varies, is going to have repercussion. Or let's say certain other organization, a particular tire organization, a organization which is producing tire, MRF, is highly dependent on a particular thing, something called rubber. If let's say the prices vary or let's say supplies reduce, it is under trouble. So one thing it can do is to create a huge inventory. Create a huge inventory. That means it's consuming 5, but it can hoard. It can hoard 50. So to some extent, it can neutralize what? That very uncertainty. That is what is buffering. Or it can also go for other type of strategies. This is something called buffering strategy. But other strategies are also there through which one can neutralize. Like let's say horizontal integration, vertical integration, or joint venture, or certain contracts. What is that? Like let's say if the organization goes for a contract with another, let's say the tire producing organization A, and it is having a particular critical dependence on a resource, let's say rubber, and to the extent it is able to neutralize this uncertainty, is going to be successful. So what possibly it can do? It can actually go for establishing a contract with a supplier. Okay, for 10 years from now, I will actually take this amount from you, and this is what is our agreement. Okay, this at this price you will give me. So the moment you go for this type of contracting, you tend to what? Neutralize. Or let's say you can include those let's say the rubber producers or the owner of the rubber producer into your board of directors. You can give shares. So in that particular context, to a large extent, you can also neutralize. Something which you can go for what you say that making them a participant. Or vertical integration. Vertical integration is something, let's say supplier, retail chain, all these you can connect through contracts, through association, through ownership sharing, number of these things. So these are number of strategies through which the vulnerabilities could be neutralized. The resource vulnerability could be neutralized. That means, see, this theory, the essence of this theory, the very primary essence of this theory is that organizations are having autonomy. But what other theorists are saying? Organizations do not have autonomy. Environment is simply determining. So this theory is saying, no, organization has autonomy. So since organization has autonomy, organization, that means within the organization, the managers, the leaders, they can take strategic decisions, and based on their strategic decisions, then they can make the organizations successful. So managers can control the fate of the organization, the leaders can control the fate of the organization. So in that particular context, not necessarily the organization is dependent on the environment exclusively to the extent that the environment determines the fate of the organization. The organization can actually define its own fate. See here, few more aspects let me discuss. A general idea that I discussed in this particular context is that the organizations are dependent on the resources that is there in the environment. So thereby the environment exercises control over the organization. To the extent the organizations are able to neutralize the vulnerability to these resources, the organizations become successful. Now which resources? Basically the most relevant and critical resource. Because you might be dependent on a number of resources, but again the most relevant and critical resource. So to the extent an organization is able to neutralize the vulnerability towards the most relevant and critical resource, it remains, it survives, or it remains successful. But few other aspects of this particular theory let me explain. See, with regard to this theory, the resource dependence theory, see, as far as this theory is concerned, this theory is saying that the manager within this organization, they have a critical role to play, and they can define, they can control the organization's fate. How they can control? They can control by knowing the environment, by knowing their critical resource of the organization, and thereby developing strategies to neutralize it. See, with regard to this particular type of argument, there are two other theorists who have provided certain additional dynamics to this theory. Those being, here I have referred to two other theorists. Basically, Minch and Swatch, these two theorists are known for a single argument, and the other is Michael Usim. See, when we refer to Minch and Swatch, by using the resource dependence theory, they have countered the managerialism thesis that emerged towards the mid of 20th century. Managerialism thesis. Now let me first of all explain what is this managerialism thesis. See, traditionally, the private organizations especially, they were understood to be working only towards profit. But gradually, when the size of the organization grew, complexity of the organization increased, it was believed that the control of the organization moved away from the owners towards the managers. So who stopped having control? Owners. And it shifted towards the managers, the professionals. Why? Because the previously size was small, the things were simple, so the owner, the entrepreneurs themselves was actually controlling, so they were actually focusing only on profit. But now the owner is not in charge of the day-to-day management of the organization. Because of the increase in the size and the complexity, you needed expertise, you need professionalism. So it shifted, the control shifted towards the hand of the managers. So that is something what Robert Mitchell will say as a managerial revolution. Manager being in control. So when manager came in control of the organization became more principled and moreover at the same time also more ethical. Why? We see managers here, they have to use not only their skill but also at the same time they act with professionalism. So for them, not only profit becomes the only focus, the other important aspects, like let's say the soul of the organization, basically simply the other important aspect in terms of, let's say, the appropriateness of the organizational functioning, apart from the efficiency, also is taken care of. So under managerialism, the emphasis is the organizations not only work towards short-term aims, but also they work towards long-term aims. Previously, since it was controlled by the owners, they were only focused on the profit, and since they only focused on the profit, the organizations were short-term oriented. Immediately that can actually bring profit. But when organization became big and more complex, what happened? The control shifted towards the managers, and when control shifted towards the managers, the managers are actually not only focused towards the profit, but they're skilled people. They have their own professional ethics. So in that particular context, not only the focus was on efficiency, the focus was also on appropriate functioning of the organization. So the short-termist approach of the entrepreneurial owners actually was no more the reality of the organization. Organization become more of a long-term oriented. But see, if you take into account theorists like, let's say, the Minch and Swatch and Michael Usim, these theorists have used resource dependence theory. By using that resource dependence theory, they have explained the futility of this managerialism thesis. Now, in their study, they negated the managerialism thesis. What was exactly their study? See, the idea under the managerialism is that the managers enjoy discretion. They're not completely under the control of, let's say, owners, because they're skilled people. They have their professional way of doing things, so they enjoy discretion. Since they enjoy discretion, so they define the nature of the organizational activities. So in that particular context, it's no more only short-term oriented, it also remains long-term oriented. But see, these theorists emphasized that the managers within the organization today, they do not operate with the discretion. Rather, they operate under lots of constraint. It will have a significant impact on analyzing the public sector or government administration. Now let me explain it primarily from what they have discussed. Then we'll try to analyze the government administration from the resource dependence theory. That explanation has been given by a theorist called Robert Golombisky. But primarily, let's try to understand this aspect. What they are saying? You see, the managers, generally it was understood managers have discretion. They are no more controlled by the owners. They are not fully controlled by the owners because they are skilled, they are professional, so they enjoy discretion in decision making. So since they enjoy discretion, then they control the organizations, then in that particular context, for them, not only the efficiency, not only the profit is the only aim, also proper functioning of the organization is important. But this theorist, in fact, negated this very view. How? Because see, they highlighted the constraint over the manager's decision is exercised through certain hegemony. In private sector today this hegemony is exercised by, hegemony means what? Supremacy, control. In private sector, this hegemony is exercised today by what they're referring as, the hegemony is exercised through money or finance. In private sector, the hegemony is exercised through money or finance, and thereby today is exercised by banks, mutual fund companies, or insurance companies, or otherwise with Michael Usim refers to as investors. Let me elaborate this. See, this theorists are saying, see, if you take into account private sector, one critical thing they require for their operation is money. So where from they get this money? They go for, let's say, share market, they float their share, or they go for loan And who is actually giving them loan? The banks are giving them loan. Mutual fund companies are giving them loan. The public or private provident fund organizations are giving them loan. Insurance companies are giving them loan because they have money. And they are the one who is giving their loan. And at the same time, these are the organizations, these are the entities today, those are the major investors in the share market. So that means the companies today are having a majority of their financial investment coming from these major organizations. And these investors, they are actually not only concerned about their money or the share, the money they have loaned or the shares they have invested, not merely concerned by depending on the managers. That means they are not passive, because they want money back, they want good return. So they are not actually dependent on the manager's ability to get them good return. Rather, what they are doing, they are directly getting involved in the decision making. So they are part of the board of directors. So these investors are the board of directors. That means they are not only in a traditional sense dependent on the managers and its ability, rather they are now directly involved in the decision making. That means they are making a voice. So in that particular context, the managers are critically operating under the pressure coming from what? A critical resource, money. So they are actually under the pressure from these investors, or let's say those who have actually loaned money. So the managers, in order to repay that money and in order to earn profit or repay that money or to remain viable, they are also oriented towards what? Profit. Simply say, if you take into account these theorists have used the same theory, resource dependence theory, to explain or to bring about additional dynamics. Basically, they're explaining the futility of this managerialism thesis in the private sector. The same idea has also been discussed in the government sector or the public sector by the theorist Robert Golombesky. So Robert Golombesky has explained the impact of the resources in the environment over the organization from the perspective of government organizations. Now, normally, in general, if you take into account government, in a government organization, what are the critical resources? Citizen, satisfaction of the citizen, the demands of the citizen, legislature, the legislature's expectation, legislature's demand, judiciary, the decisions of the judiciary. So, number of these things are actually the critical resources of the government. So Golombesky has explained the importance of these resources and the government and its dependence on these resources, and to the extent the government and its structure, its functioning is influenced by the resources in the environment. Now some points he has made. I'm just dictating these points. Please write down. The first is public organizations provides a large number of opportunities. Public organization provides a large number of opportunities for multiple access to multiple authoritative decision makers. multiple authoritative decision makers. That is, policy making processes are designed to be influenced by a range of constituencies that represent a wide range of views That's simply saying, now this aspect is saying that if you take into account government, in government as far as the decision making is concerned, so number of, because the government is concerned with various groups, interested citizen, affected citizen, or let's say within the government, the bureaucracy, legislature, or for that matter judiciary. So number of these entities are there, those who are very important for the government, that critical resources for the government. So as far as the decision making is concerned, all these are going to be influencing, all these are going to be participating. So that critically, that decision making of the government is going to be influenced by number of these entities. The second is the pressure for accountability. The pressure for accountability and fear of the political and legal repercussions, and the fear of the political and legal repercussions of decisions result in administrative behavior that is highly cautious and constrained by multiple layers of approval multiple layers of approval. This can also encourage a culture that generates the doctor no syndrome. The doctor no syndrome. Give a hyphen. It often becomes all too easy. It often becomes all too easy to fall into the habit of generating reasons why actions cannot be taken, or why actions cannot work, comma, should not be undertaken, or will be objected. See, accountability in the government is high or low as compared to private sector? Higher. Public media, judiciary, citizen, within the organization hierarchy, number of vigilance organization. So this results into a more passive approach or active approach? Passive. So generally what happens? Doctor no syndrome. Doctor no syndrome means moment you become a civil servant, what you'll start doing? You'll start saying, I can't do this. Or you'll start, if you have to write a note, be very in writing a note. Why? Because always you will be thinking, I might be caught, I might be questioned, I might be answerable, I have to do this or that. So that actually brings about what? A more passive attitude, a more no attitude rather than yes attitude. Now that's what how environment is having constraining effect on the organization. The third is the goals and objectives. The goals and objectives of the public organization may be imposed by multiple external authorities. Such as legislative and judicial branches. Four, next, external agencies are also more likely to mandate. External agencies are also more likely to mandate the administrative and managerial practices. Five, next, fourth, likely to mandate, the external agencies are also more likely to mandate the administrative and managerial practices. The next is government organizations. Government organizations not only have permanent executives but also temporary political executives. Temporary political executives. The entry of political appointees or these political executives can bring in rapid change in organizational priorities for the purpose of short-term political gain. For the purpose of short-term political gain. That means if you take into account, unlike in the private sector, in private sector there might be board of directors, but those are very permanent. The same people for a longer period of time. But in government, there is not only professional permanent employees, but also there is political appointee, minister, prime minister. So they come and go. So when they come for their own political, they fix their own political priority. So when a new political establishment is coming, it is having its own political priority. So that means accordingly the functioning of the administration also changes. Similarly, next, budget constraints. Budget constraint and public oversight of employees' salaries. Public oversight of employee salaries and compensation diminish the range of incentives that can be used to encourage risk-taking and extraordinary work effort. So this is something saying that if you take into account in public organization, they're sustained through budget, the public taxes, so that is public oversight. So the salaries that is going to be paid, the perks and privileges are going to be given, those are going to be under what? Public scrutiny. So that is why you cannot have the flexibility of the private sector. So since you cannot have the flexibility of the private sector, what happens? You cannot have that type of remuneration structure or the benefit structure where you can encourage risk-taking, innovation, creativity, extraordinary, let's say, effort. So that's a limitation. So Golombaski in this is explaining that how because of some external environment, external constraint, the government structure, government functioning are defined. So this is something we can simply say the Golumbesky has taken help of very essential ingredient of that resource dependence theory to explain the government organization. So this is briefly the resource dependence theory. So today we went through these three major parts. In tomorrow's class I will take up this institutional theory, and subsequent to that we will enter into one more aspect relating to this parts of the elements of the organization, that is the impact of technology, the impact of the technology on the organization. Okay? Chalo, thank you.